He wanted to feel young again, but by morning, he was gone. Palm Beach, Florida, the playground of America's ultra-wealthy, where secrets are kept behind gold-plated doors and nothing is ever quite what it seems. On the morning of May 3rd, 2024, chaos erupted inside Penthouse, Suite 33 of the Ocean Crest Resort. Staff were used to eccentric guests, billionaires throwing private parties, models arriving at midnight, and do not disturb signs that stayed up for days. But nothing could prepare them for what they found that morning. At exactly 6:42 a.m., a young woman, later identified as Crystal Lane, age 22, ran out of the suite barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe, and sobbing uncontrollably. Her mascara was smeared, her hands shaking. She yelled, "Please, he's not breathing." Security rushed in. On the king-size bed lay Harold Whitmore, a 68-year-old real estate magnate worth over $800 million. He was completely unresponsive. His body was slick with sweat, eyes wide open, chest still. The thermostat read 76 degrees Fahrenheit, but the room felt ice cold. Paramedics arrived within minutes. But Harold was already gone. Whitmore was a household name in the business world, a self-made tycoon who transformed Florida's skyline with his luxury towers and beachfront resorts. He was also known for his flashy lifestyle, private jets, exotic cars, and an undeniable interest in women far younger than himself. To the media, he was charismatic. To his inner circle, he was restless. And to at least one person that night, he was trying too hard to prove something. According to Crystal, she and Harold had spent the previous evening celebrating at the resort. There was champagne, room service, and what she described as a long, intense night. They stayed inside the suite the entire time. She told investigators that Harold was energized, almost hyperactive, pushing himself well beyond what she thought was safe. "I told him to slow down," she said, "but he kept saying he was fine, that he didn't want to waste a minute." By her account, Harold became increasingly flushed and short of breath around 3 a.m. She encouraged him to lie down, and eventually they both drifted off. When she awoke a few hours later, his body was cold. Crystal was taken to the hospital with signs of extreme exhaustion and dehydration. She was emotionally distraught and cooperated fully with law enforcement. For the public, her identity became the focus. A glamorous young woman spending time with a wealthy older man who died unexpectedly in her presence. The press swarmed the story. Florida tycoon found dead in hotel room after night with mysterious young companion. He died chasing youth. The tragic end of Harold Whitmore. Was it natural causes or something more sinister? Speculation exploded. Some believed it was simply overindulgence. Others whispered about foul play. But for detectives, one thing was clear from the start. This wasn't as straightforward as it looked. The autopsy revealed that Harold died from cardiac arrest, likely triggered by a combination of physical stress and chemical compounds in his system. What raised eyebrows was that these compounds weren't part of any prescription on file. They included a high dose of stimulant-enhancing agents, mixed with traces of alcohol. Even more concerning, investigators recovered an unlabeled pill bottle under the bed. No pharmacy tag, no doctor's name, just a generic black container. Crystal insisted she hadn't brought it. "I thought it was something he was used to," she told detectives. "He said it helped him keep up." The room showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. But one detail couldn't be ignored. The security cameras near the penthouse hallway went dark at 2:57 a.m., precisely during the hours when Harold's condition likely worsened. And then came the first twist. A hotel staff member came forward to report seeing a woman, older, elegant, wearing dark sunglasses and a designer coat, enter the building through the service entrance earlier that day. She was captured on a back hallway camera heading toward the elevator. No name was recorded, and she never passed the front desk. That footage was time-stamped just 3 hours before Harold's estimated time of death. Detectives enhanced the footage. The woman's face was partially obscured, but her walk, her mannerisms, they were familiar to one of the investigators. She looked exactly like Marjorie Whitmore. Harold's estranged wife. The marriage between Harold and Marjorie had long been a subject of quiet gossip among Florida's elite. They had been together for over 3 decades. Business partners, power couple, public smiles. But privately, insiders knew the relationship had soured years ago. Harold had filed for divorce just 6 weeks earlier. The split was poised to cost him over $300 million, unless a revised will, signed days before his trip to Palm Beach, was accepted in court. That new will restored Marjorie as primary beneficiary, replacing Harold's assistant, 2 business foundations, and a private trust for future family. The timing was curious. As detectives dug deeper, they began to suspect that Harold's death wasn't a tragic accident, but part of something far more deliberate. The pills, the stimulants, the altered will, and now a mystery visitor matching Marjorie's description. This wasn't just about a man who pushed himself too far. It might be about a woman who made sure he couldn't come back. And a young companion? She may have been just a pawn in someone else's deadly plan. Long before the headlines and the flashing cameras, before the tragic morning at the Ocean Crest Resort, Harold and Marjorie Whitmore were one of Florida's most respected couples. From the outside, they had it all: wealth, prestige, and decades of shared success. But behind the walls of their sprawling Palm Beach estate, the marriage had been quietly crumbling for years. They met in the early 1980s. Marjorie was a brilliant accounting graduate with an eye for risk, and Harold was a dreamer with dirt under his fingernails and skyscrapers in his imagination. She helped him secure his first big loan, organize his books, and structure the company that would become Whitmore Properties, a development empire worth billions. Their partnership wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. She handled the numbers, the legal hurdles, the boardroom politics. He handled the charm, the vision, the handshakes. For nearly 30 years, they were unstoppable, until Harold started chasing something else. By the time Harold turned 60, the man who once obsessed over building cities had shifted his focus to preserving his youth. Personal trainers, cosmetic treatments, fast cars, faster companions. Everything about him began to scream midlife crisis. Only this one came with a platinum credit card. Marjorie, ever poised and deliberate, watched it all unfold from a distance. She never went public, never gave interviews. She simply moved into the guest house, stopped wearing her wedding ring, and quietly made adjustments to the estate's finances. Friends close to the couple noticed the tension. At charity galas, Harold would arrive with much younger guests and introduce them as businessmen or creative consultants. Marjorie would smile politely, raise her glass, and say nothing. But underneath the surface, resentment simmered. 6 weeks before Harold's death, he filed for divorce. It wasn't unexpected. Marjorie had already hired her own legal team. But what shocked everyone was the scale of what Harold was willing to walk away from. In the original prenuptial agreement, she was entitled to a fixed settlement. However, she discovered multiple offshore accounts and unreported business holdings and planned to expose them. According to court records, Marjorie refused to sign the updated divorce terms, which would have limited her to $20 million, a fraction of what she helped build. Instead, she demanded access to the full financial picture. Harold responded by removing her from his will and placing his assets in a new trust. The legal war was turning ugly. But then something strange happened. Just 10 days before the incident at Ocean Crest, Harold signed a new version of his will, this time naming Marjorie as his sole beneficiary again. No one knew why. He hadn't told his lawyers. He hadn't informed his business manager. The signature was verified, the document notarized, but the only copy was found in his home office printer and signed by any witness. Despite the chaos behind the scenes, Marjorie continued presenting a calm, dignified image to the world. She attended garden club events. She hosted luncheons for civic leaders. She even made a generous donation to a local children's hospital 2 days before Harold's final trip. But those who knew her well described something colder beneath the surface. She was always 2 moves ahead, said a former employee. Never raised her voice. Never forgot a number. If she smiled at you, it was because she'd already made her decision. Neighbors noticed that her luxury car hadn't moved for several days, but on the night of May 2nd, it was gone from the driveway for 6 hours. Security cameras showed her returning home after 4 a.m. When asked where she had been, Marjorie claimed she had taken a late-night drive to clear her head. But investigators weren't so sure. There was another detail that hadn't gone unnoticed by detectives. Marjorie had once been a licensed nurse. Before joining Harold in business, she'd spent 4 years working in cardiology at a Miami hospital. Her certification had expired decades ago, but her medical knowledge hadn't. She knew how the heart worked. She knew what overstimulation looked like. She knew what kinds of substances could accelerate cardiac stress and go undetected unless someone was looking for them. It was just enough knowledge to raise suspicion. Harold's funeral was held 6 days after his death. It was a lavish ceremony at St. Augustine Cathedral, filled with real estate magnates, politicians, and media figures. His casket was draped in white roses and flanked by photos of his early days as a builder. Marjorie sat in the front row, dressed in black, her face unreadable. Crystal Lane was not invited. When reporters asked about Harold's death, Marjorie offered only one statement. He lived the way he wanted. He died the way he chose. But behind closed doors, the investigation was gaining momentum. And it was becoming clear to detectives that Harold hadn't chosen anything that night. Someone had chosen for him, and that someone may have spent 30 years sleeping beside him. To the world, Crystal Lane was just another beautiful face in a digital sea of influencers. Long legs, designer handbags, luxury dinners, and vague captions about gratitude and vibes. But beneath the curated posts and filtered selfies was a young woman trying to survive in a world where youth and appearance were often the only currency accepted. Crystal had grown up in Clearwater, Florida, raised by a single mother who worked nights at a hospital and days cleaning houses. College was never a guarantee, and when Crystal was accepted into a nursing program at 19, she saw it as a ticket out. But after 2 years of juggling classes, rent, and side jobs, she dropped out. A friend introduced her to private companionship, arrangements with wealthy men who paid for company, conversation, and often much more. "I didn't think it would last long," she told investigators later, "just until I got back on my feet." Instead, she got swept into the lifestyle. She first encountered Harold Whitmore at a charity gala hosted at a private estate in Coral Gables. She wasn't invited. She came as the date of an aging venture capitalist who liked to show off his arm candy. Harold noticed her almost instantly. According to Crystal, he approached her during cocktail hour and said, "You don't belong here. Not with that guy. You should be with someone who actually sees you." It wasn't the first time she'd heard a line like that. But there was something different about Harold. He wasn't lecherous. He was charming, confident, and commanding. The kind of man who didn't ask for attention. He drew it in. Within 48 hours, Crystal was flown to Palm Beach on a private jet. Harold had booked her a suite, taken her shopping, and offered her a weekend to remember. She accepted. Over the next 2 weeks, Harold and Crystal met several times, always in private, always behind closed doors. To the outside world, she was invisible. To Harold, she became a temporary obsession. He liked control, she said, but not in a scary way. He just needed to feel like he was in charge. He would tell her stories about the early days of his career, his battles with investors, how women complicate business. He rarely mentioned his wife. When he did, it was brief. "We've been done for years," he once muttered. "She's a ghost in a silk robe." Crystal didn't ask questions. She knew the rules: don't dig, don't pry, and don't get attached. But during their final encounter, something changed. Harold called her 2 nights before the Palm Beach trip. His tone was different, more urgent. He said he wanted one last getaway. Just the two of them, no staff, no distractions. A weekend where he could feel alive. He wired her $50,000 in advance and arranged for a black car to pick her up. She was instructed not to bring friends, not to post anything online, and to leave her phone in the suite once she arrived. She agreed. When she arrived at the Ocean Crest Resort, Harold was already in the penthouse, waiting with a chilled bottle of wine and a sealed envelope with her name on it. Inside was a handwritten note. "For the perfect escape, No drama. Just you, me, and time standing still. It felt almost romantic, but what followed was anything but ordinary. According to Crystal, Harold was unusually restless that night. He moved from room to room, talking rapidly, taking phone calls she couldn't hear, and sipping from a separate glass of wine he poured himself, not the one they'd opened together. He kept insisting that they celebrate properly, that this was his moment. Crystal noticed a small black bottle on the nightstand. No label, no markings. When she asked what it was, Harold laughed and said, "Just something to keep the engine running." She grew concerned. He was sweating. His hand was shaking a little. I told him to slow down, but he just kept saying, "I've got one more in me." Then two more. Then three. She lost count around 3 a.m. By then, Crystal said she was exhausted and tried to sleep. But Harold kept moving. She vaguely remembers him walking into the bathroom, muttering something under his breath. The light stayed on. She drifted off around 4 a.m. When she woke up, he was cold. In the hospital, Crystal replayed everything in her mind, over and over. Could she have stopped it? Should she have called for help sooner? But something else haunted her. Earlier that evening, before the wine, before Harold grew erratic, a woman had approached her near the hotel spa, claiming to be part of Harold's team. She was older, elegant, wore dark glasses, and carried a small gift bag. "He wanted me to give this to you," the woman said, handing her a small box with gold trim. Inside was a black bottle, the same kind Crystal saw later on the nightstand. "It's nothing dangerous," the woman had said with a smile. "Just something to keep him happy." Crystal didn't think twice at the time. But now, in the harsh light of day, it felt all wrong. She described the woman to investigators. Her hair, her voice, her calm, measured tone. When police showed her a photograph of Marjorie Whitmore, Crystal's breath caught. "That's her," she whispered. "That's the woman who gave me the bottle." It was the first time Crystal realized she might not have been just a companion that night. She might have been a tool, a carefully placed piece in someone else's plan. Someone who knew Harold's weaknesses. Someone who knew what buttons to push. Someone who had everything to lose if Harold followed through with his divorce. The tragedy of Harold Whitmore's death wasn't just that he collapsed during a private evening with a much younger woman. It was that everything, from the invitation to the bottle to the revised will, had been orchestrated with surgical precision. Crystal was young. Harold was reckless. But somewhere in the shadows, a far colder hand had guided the night toward its fatal ending. And that hand, detectives suspected, might have belonged to the woman he once trusted most, his wife. The sun had just begun to rise over the Atlantic when Crystal Lane opened her eyes. At first, she didn't register what had happened. The penthouse was quiet, the room still dim. She reached out instinctively, expecting Harold to be beside her. But her fingers touched cold skin. Very cold. She sat up, the silk sheets sliding off her shoulders. Harold Whitmore lay on his back, motionless, eyes half open, lips parted as if caught mid-breath. One hand was clenched into a fist over his chest, the other dangled loosely off the bed. Crystal screamed. Security footage later showed her stumbling into the hallway barefoot, calling for help. A guest from the floor below reported hearing cries echoing through the atrium. Within minutes, hotel security arrived. They entered the penthouse to find a scene that looked peaceful at first glance. A bottle of wine on the nightstand, clothes folded neatly on a nearby chair, soft jazz still playing on a hidden speaker. But Harold's body told a different story. He wasn't just unresponsive. He was rigid, his skin pale and damp. His jaw had locked, and his face bore a frozen expression of strain. Paramedics declared him dead at the scene. Time of death, approximately 4:15 a.m. From the outside, it could have been written off as a tragic case of overexertion. A 68-year-old man pushing his limits with someone half a century younger. A private evening gone too far. But for Detective Angela Reyes, the lead investigator assigned to the case, something felt off the moment she entered the suite. There was no sign of panic. No calls made to 911. No attempt to revive. Just silence. Crystal, still in shock, told paramedics that she had tried to shake Harold awake, but it was too late. She didn't call emergency services. She ran. She couldn't remember much else. Angela scanned the room. She noticed the unlabeled bottle beneath the bed. It was small, black, and had no prescription label. Inside were a few crushed remnants of white capsules. On the counter in the wet bar, a wine glass with faint red lipstick sat untouched. But across the room, another wine glass, the one Harold had been drinking from, was nearly empty. Angela ordered both glasses to be tested immediately. The Ocean Crest Resort prided itself on privacy, but its security system was state-of-the-art. Cameras covered nearly every hallway, elevator, and exit. That made it all the more suspicious when Detective Reyes discovered a 2-hour gap in hallway footage, starting just before 3 a.m., the time frame when Harold is believed to have died. It was clean. Too clean, she later recalled. Like someone knew exactly what to unplug. Technicians found that the cameras on Harold's floor had been manually disabled. The wires were still intact. The power hadn't failed. It was a remote override, done using staff credentials. Only 5 people had access. One of them? Marjorie Whitmore. Through an inactive guest account, she was still tied to from a previous stay. While forensics combed through the suite, Marjorie Whitmore made her first public appearance. Not at the scene, but in a carefully orchestrated press statement outside her estate. Dressed in black, with pearl earrings and a veil, she spoke for less than a minute. "I am heartbroken by the sudden loss of my husband, Harold. While we had our differences, he will always be remembered as a brilliant man and a builder of dreams. I ask for privacy as I grieve. No tears, no emotion." The media largely accepted her statement at face value. But back at the station, Detective Reyes had already started digging, and what she found made her pause. 3 days before his death, Harold had updated his will again, reinstating Marjorie as sole heir. The change had been notarized but not yet filed with the court. It had been sitting and signed by a witness in the printer tray at his Palm Beach home. A hotel staff member who worked near the spa area came forward voluntarily. She remembered a strange encounter on the night of Harold's death. A woman in oversized sunglasses, wearing a tan trench coat and red lipstick, approached the front desk. She asked if she could drop off a care package for a guest. The staffer remembered the name, Crystal Lane, and took the bag up herself. Inside, according to Crystal, had been a black bottle with a ribbon on it and a note. Just a little something to keep him smiling. At the time, she thought it was from Harold's assistant or someone in his inner circle. She didn't question it, but now, it looked like a setup. The final results arrived 3 days later. The wine glass Harold drank from contained high traces of a cardiac stimulant no longer approved for commercial use in the U.S. It causes elevated heart rate, heightened physical response, and, in rare cases, acute cardiac arrest, especially in individuals with underlying heart conditions. The crushed capsules from the black bottle matched the same compound. In combination with alcohol and high adrenaline levels, it was a lethal mix. The stimulant wasn't in Crystal's system. She hadn't taken any. It was all in Harold, and someone had made sure he got it. By the end of the week, Detective Reyes had enough to shift the direction of the case. What had initially looked like a natural death had become a suspicious incident, and potentially a planned act. Crystal Lane was ruled out as a suspect. She was young, inexperienced, and likely manipulated. The evidence was pointing somewhere else. To someone older. To someone with motive. To someone who had just inherited an empire. Detective Angela Reyes had worked homicide in Palm Beach County for over 16 years. She had seen the usual suspects, jealous lovers, drug deals gone wrong, and family feuds turned fatal. But this was different. This was wealth and power dressed in grief. The kind of case where every word was measured, every move rehearsed. And at the center of it all was a man who died in bed with a smile on his face and poison in his veins. The deeper she looked, the more carefully constructed the narrative appeared. Harold Whitmore, real estate mogul, philanthropist, and occasional playboy, dies suddenly during a private weekend with a much younger woman. The press chalked it up to indulgence. The public ate it up, but Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that the real story hadn't even started yet. She began with the bottle. The small, unlabeled black container retrieved from under the bed contained traces of a compound that had once been used in experimental stimulant therapy. It had never passed FDA approval due to severe cardiovascular side effects. No licensed pharmacy carried it. The only way Harold could have obtained it was through private import or someone with access to a compounding lab. Neither matched his profile. Crystal Lane's statement remained consistent. She claimed she received the bottle as a gift from a woman she believed was part of Harold's staff. The woman never gave a name, but described herself as someone who helps Mr. Whitmore stay energized. Crystal, naive and overwhelmed, accepted it without question. Surveillance footage showed a woman matching Marjorie Whitmore's general build entering the Ocean Crest through the rear service entrance just hours before Harold's death. Her face was obscured, but her signature walk, graceful, slow, deliberate, matched past videos of Marjorie attending charity functions and board meetings. Reyes reviewed footage frame by frame. In one shot, the woman paused at a corner, checking her reflection in the brass elevator door. A quick flick of her hand to adjust her scarf. A slight tilt of her chin. It wasn't enough for a formal ID, but it was enough for suspicion to bloom. Then came the records. Harold's security system at his Palm Beach estate showed a series of unusual logins the week before his trip. A remote access account, one registered to Marjorie during her time as head of estate management, had been used to print multiple versions of Harold's will. One of them, dated 3 days before his death, restored her as sole heir. Another version, never signed, left everything to a charitable foundation and effectively cut her out entirely. The final, signed version was the one found in his office printer, with her name printed clearly in block letters. Why would Harold sign a new will reinstating the woman he was divorcing? Reyes found no record of reconciliation, no communication, no romantic gestures. But financial pressure? That was another story. Harold's accounts had been under stress. Multiple offshore holdings were under federal review. 2 of his business partners were preparing lawsuits. He needed stability, and keeping Marjorie calm, at least temporarily, may have seemed like the easiest option. What he didn't know was that Marjorie wasn't interested in negotiation. She was making moves of her own. The next break came from a financial analyst Reyes brought in to quietly audit Harold's recent transactions. 3 days before his death, a wire transfer had been scheduled, $8.3 million to a private account in the Cayman Islands. The account was listed under a trust named MW Consolidated. The trust, as it turned out, had been created by Marjorie Whitmore 6 months earlier. A beneficiary? Herself. The transfer was canceled upon his death, but the intention was clear. Harold had agreed to pay her to disappear. But she hadn't disappeared. She'd shown up. One staff member at the Whitmore estate, a longtime housekeeper, recalled a strange interaction with Marjorie just 2 nights before Harold left for the resort. According to the staffer, Marjorie had been calm, almost too calm, and asked to retrieve a small personal box from Harold's private study. The room was off-limits to everyone, but she claimed Harold had given her permission. The staffer hesitated, but let her in. That box was later found empty. Inside the suite, Reyes had discovered a handwritten note from Harold to Crystal, meant to accompany the wine and envelope he'd left for her. But something about the wording struck her as odd. He wrote, "Here's to going out strong." Not living strong. Not celebrating. Going out. Was it dark humor? Or did he know something? Toxicology confirmed that the stimulant in Harold's system wasn't from a single dose. The concentration was too high. It had been administered gradually, likely mixed into his drink, possibly even hours before Crystal arrived. The dosage was intentional. Measured. That pointed to planning. That pointed to murder. With mounting evidence, Detective Reyes applied for a warrant to search Marjorie's personal residence. The judge hesitated. There was still no smoking gun, no fingerprint, no confession. But Reyes argued that Marjorie's behavior was too precise, too perfectly timed. When they searched Marjorie's study, they found what they needed. Locked in a drawer beneath financial statements and estate contracts was a small pill cutter, stained faintly with residue matching the compound found in Harold's bloodstream. Alongside it was a monogrammed notebook with scribbled calculations, notes on half-lives, dosages by weight, and handwritten initials, HW. Reyes stared at the page for a long time. A woman scorned? Maybe. But this wasn't rage. This was science. This was strategy. This was a quiet dismantling of a man built on 30 years of knowing exactly how he functioned, mentally, emotionally, and biologically. On the final page of the notebook was a single line. It had to look like it was his idea. The case file was reclassified. Not accidental death. Not misadventure. Homicide. Reyes picked up her phone, took a breath, and dialed the number she knew would change everything. Bring her in. The interview room at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office wasn't designed for comfort. The walls were pale, the light harsh, the temperature just slightly too cold to ignore. But Marjorie Whitmore sat at the center of it all like she was in her own parlor. Hands folded neatly in her lap, chin slightly raised, pearl earrings catching the sterile light. Detective Angela Reyes entered without ceremony, dropped the case file on the metal table, and sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither woman said a word. Then Marjorie spoke first. I assume this isn't about the will. Reyes didn't flinch. It's about your husband, and how he died. Marjorie gave a small, sad smile. Harold had a strong will and a weak heart. That's always been a dangerous combination. Reyes opened the file and slid out the lab report, placing it gently on the table. He didn't just die, Mrs. Whitmore. He was poisoned, with a stimulant not approved for human use, introduced gradually over several hours. We found the substance in his bloodstream, in the wine he drank, and on a pill cutter from your study. Marjorie didn't blink. That's terrible. We also have footage, Reyes continued, of a woman matching your description entering the resort through the service entrance. No check-in, no front desk record. You were wearing a trench coat and sunglasses. You carried a gift bag. Marjorie tilted her head, as if considering whether the claim amused or insulted her. You're saying I snuck into a luxury resort in disguise to deliver a drug to my estranged husband? I'm saying, Reyes said calmly, that your husband was preparing to finalize a divorce that would have left you with almost nothing. I'm saying he died the night after signing a will that put everything back in your name. And I'm saying the only person who stood to gain from his death was you. Silence again. Marjorie leaned forward, her voice still soft. Detective, do you know what it's like to spend 30 years building something with someone, only to be replaced by someone younger, prettier, emptier? Do you know what it's like to become invisible in your own home? Reyes didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marjorie sat back and exhaled slowly. Harold made his choices. I made mine. Did you kill him? Reyes asked. The older woman smiled. Not with joy, but with something colder. I gave him what he wanted, which was to feel powerful one last time, to go out on top, to believe he still had control. Reyes narrowed her eyes. But you were the one in control, weren't you? Marjorie didn't respond. Her silence said more than words ever could. The interview continued for over an hour, but Marjorie never admitted guilt. She never denied it either. Every question was met with an answer just vague enough to dance around legality, just calculated enough to frustrate prosecution. She was a master of implication, speaking in riddles, delivering truths dressed as memories, guilt laced with nostalgia. She referenced the bottle Crystal received as a suggestion, not an instruction. She claimed she only wanted Harold to enjoy himself, that men in his condition often take things too far. She described Harold as reckless with his body, generous with his ego, and blind to the consequences of his appetites. At one point, Reyes asked her directly, "Did you plan it?" Marjorie looked her in the eye and said, "No, detective. I calculated it." There was no way to charge her on that line alone, but to Reyes, it was a confession in everything but name. The interview ended with Marjorie calmly requesting tea, declining a lawyer for now, and complimenting the detective's blazer. "Charcoal suits you," she said. "Makes you look grounded." Reyes left the room seething but focused. She had built cases on less. But this was a chess match, and Marjorie Whitmore was no amateur. Outside the room, the district attorney was already reviewing the materials. Toxicology, surveillance, financial motive, the pill cutter, the deleted camera logs. The The forensic analysis of the gift bag's contents all pointed toward a deliberate orchestration, not an accident. But the case would be difficult. No eyewitness, no digital confession, just pieces expertly placed. As Reyes reviewed her notes, she paused on the phrase written in Marjorie's private notebook. It had to look like it was his idea. It echoed in her mind over and over. Not just a plan, a philosophy, a way of removing someone while letting the world believe they did it to themselves. She wasn't just cleaning up a failed marriage. She was erasing a man, step by step, without ever lifting a hand in violence. And in doing so, she had become something much darker than a grieving widow. She had become a ghost maker. The courthouse in downtown Palm Beach was packed. Journalists lined the front steps, camera crews jockeyed for position, and true crime bloggers whispered updates into their phones like courtroom correspondents from a bygone era. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. People weren't just here to witness justice. They were here to see Marjorie Whitmore, the elegant widow turned accused conspirator, finally unmasked. The state's case had taken months to build, carefully, methodically, and under a veil of silence. Prosecutors knew they couldn't rely on a single piece of evidence. What they had was a puzzle made of subtle parts: behavior, motive, medical knowledge, financial pressure, and timing so precise it could have been pulled from a novel. But on day one, the prosecution opened with a quiet bombshell. This was not a crime of passion, the lead prosecutor said. It was a crime of calculation, the kind that takes years to understand a man's strengths, his weaknesses, and how to weaponize both. Marjorie sat at the defense table in a tailored navy blue suit, expression unreadable. No tears, no emotion, just poise. Then came the star witness. Crystal Lane, now 23, took the stand. She had changed. Gone was the glamorous social media presence. Her hair was darker, her makeup toned down. She looked more like a frightened college student than the tabloid caricature from a year ago. She testified about the weekend at Ocean Crest, the gift bag, the woman at the spa, the unmarked bottle, and the night that turned from playful to terrifying. He kept saying this was his last big night. I thought it was just talk. But after that bottle showed up, he changed. His face turned red. He was sweating. I kept asking him to stop. She paused, voice shaking. I passed out sometime around 3 a.m. When I woke up, he was gone. The defense tried to paint her as an opportunist, a woman who benefited financially from Harold's attention, someone who had every reason to exaggerate. But Crystal remained calm, even when pressed. I didn't know I was part of someone else's plan, she said. But I see it now. The next witness was a toxicologist, expert in cardiac stimulants. He confirmed that the compound in Harold's bloodstream was not only dangerous, but likely administered in repeated, increasing doses. One capsule wouldn't have killed him, but taken gradually, combined with alcohol and physical stress, it was fatal. Then came the forensic analyst, who traced the source of the stimulant to a compounding lab that had recently been shut down for violations. The name listed on the pickup log? A woman using a fake ID, but the handwriting matched samples taken from Marjorie's private journal. Still, the case remained circumstantial, until Detective Reyes revealed the final piece. It had taken months to retrieve the data. The security system in Harold's estate had overwritten most digital logs, but a backup server, forgotten in the guest house, still held encrypted timestamps from the week before Harold's trip. One entry stood out. At 2:08 a.m., 2 nights before the trip, Marjorie logged in remotely and sent a command to print a revised will, the one that restored her as full beneficiary. The print job originated from her old tablet, synced through the house's outdated control system. It was sloppy, uncharacteristic. She didn't think anyone would look that deep, Reyes said. She didn't think anyone would find it. Then came perhaps the most chilling moment of the trial. Prosecutors introduced the notebook found in Marjorie's study, the pill cutter, the notes on dosage, the line that stuck with every juror in the room. It had to look like it was his idea. The handwriting was confirmed as hers. And although the defense insisted the note was a journal exercise, the context was impossible to ignore. Over 3 weeks of testimony, the picture sharpened, A woman who had helped build an empire, only to be discarded when her husband found youth in other arms. A woman who refused to be written out of the legacy she helped create. A woman who didn't act out of rage, but out of precision. The defense never called Marjorie to the stand. Her silence became its own message. In closing arguments, the prosecutor asked the jury not to focus on the lack of fingerprints or a smoking gun, but on the nature of the weapon itself: intelligence, patience, and proximity. She didn't need to pull a trigger, he said. She just needed to plant the seed and let everyone else play their part. The deliberations took less than 5 hours. When the jury returned, the foreman's voice was steady. We find the defendant, Marjorie and Whitmore, guilty of murder in the second degree and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Marjorie blinked once, but made no other movement. She sat straight, lips tight, as if the verdict had already been expected. Crystal buried her face in her hands. Detective Reyes exhaled and finally allowed her spine to relax. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Marjorie received life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the cold, premeditated manipulation of a vulnerable man. But even as she was led out of the courtroom, handcuffed and silent, she turned briefly toward the gallery and smiled. A smile not of regret, but of victory. Because in the end, she had still taken back control. She'd shaped the narrative. She'd stayed composed. And she'd made sure Harold's final chapter wasn't written by a young woman in a silk robe, but by the only person who had known him, broken him, and outlived him: his wife. 6 months after the verdict, the Whitmore estate remained frozen in time. The marble floors were still polished, the fountains still flowed in the courtyard, and the paintings still hung in perfect symmetry across the study walls. But something had shifted. The silence was heavier now, thicker, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. As if the house, once a monument to wealth and ambition, knew what had happened beneath its roof. Harold Whitmore was gone, buried in a mausoleum that bore his name in gold leaf, next to an empty space reserved for a woman who would never be laid beside him. That woman, Marjorie Ann Whitmore, was now housed in the Central Florida Correctional Facility, inmate number 440819, classified as a high-security nonviolent offender. She lived in a 9x12 cell, wore state-issued gray, and followed a strict daily schedule. But even behind bars, her presence loomed larger than most inmates. The other women called her the widow. Some called her the doctor. But most called her by a name whispered more than spoken: the Ghostmaker. She rarely spoke. She declined interviews, refused visits, and ignored letters. She volunteered in the prison library, helped catalog books, and mentored 2 younger women working toward their GEDs. She was quiet, controlled, dangerous in a way no one could quite define. But her legacy had already begun to seep out beyond prison walls. The case of Harold Whitmore's death had captivated America. Cable news covered the trial for weeks. Podcasts dissected every witness. True crime YouTubers drew diagrams of the penthouse suite, analyzed Crystal's tone of voice, debated whether Marjorie's smile after sentencing was real or rehearsed. Theories blossomed like weeds. Was it really about money? Or had Marjorie loved Harold in her own twisted way and simply refused to be discarded? Was Crystal completely innocent? Or had she known more than she let on? Had Harold himself suspected something? And if so, did he go to that penthouse knowing it might be his last night alive? The final question was perhaps the darkest. Was the plan to kill Harold, or just to let him kill himself with a little help? That ambiguity became the hook. Streaming networks fought for documentary rights. A dramatized series was greenlit. One tabloid even ran a special edition titled "How to Spot a Ghost Maker in Your Life," complete with a checklist. But through it all, Marjorie never said a word. 3 weeks after sentencing, Crystal Lane deleted all of her social media accounts. Her last post, a black screen with white text, simply read, "Don't let them use you, and don't let them bury you." She was last seen boarding a flight to Denver under her legal name, Kristen Elaine Moore. According to airline records, she connected to a smaller regional flight, then disappeared completely from public view. 3 months later, in a quiet mountain town outside Durango, Colorado, a waitress named Kristen Moore clocked in for her afternoon shift at a roadside diner with fog windows and pie specials handwritten in fading marker. She moved like someone trying not to be noticed, hair tucked into a low bun, sleeves always rolled down, no jewelry, no phone ever in sight. One Wednesday, just before closing, an older woman entered, tall, frail, wrapped in a wool coat despite the spring breeze. She took the corner booth and ordered only black tea. Her eyes barely blinked. They stayed locked on Kristen the entire time. When Kristen brought the tea, the woman spoke in a whispery voice. "He wasn't always like that, you know." Kristen paused. "Excuse me? My son, Harold." Her throat dried. The woman opened her handbag and slid a small, creased photo onto the table. A black and white image of a boy with knobby knees, standing next to a stack of bricks, smiling with a mouth too big for his face. Before the towers, before the women, he built birdhouses for the neighbors, fixed broken fences with his bare hands. He gave away more than he kept. Kristen sat down slowly, heart racing, and somewhere along the way, something changed. Or maybe something broke. I still don't know. The woman took a breath and looked Kristen in the eyes, not with judgment, not with pity, but with something else entirely. Understanding. "I don't blame you. I just wanted you to see the boy before the man." She stood, leaving the photo behind. "You were the last person he saw. I thought you should know who he used to be." And with that, she walked out into the Colorado dusk and was gone. Kristen sat there for almost an hour, staring at the picture. Not crying, not shaking, just still. Later, when asked about that day by a local reporter working on a follow-up piece, the diner owner said, "She was never the same after that. She worked quietly, left her tips behind, and one day just stopped showing up." Detective Reyes believed she had gone underground intentionally. "She was a survivor," Reyes said in a later interview. "Used, manipulated, thrown into something far bigger than she ever expected. I think she just wanted to be forgotten." Rumors persisted that she'd changed her identity, maybe gone back to school. Some claimed she worked at a diner in Montana. Others said she joined a convent. No one knew for sure. What was clear, however, was that Crystal was never the same. In court, she had been composed. But behind the scenes, she had struggled with guilt, therapy, and night terrors. In a private deposition, she once admitted, "I see his face every time I close my eyes. And sometimes, I hear hers." For Angela Reyes, the case had become the defining moment of her career. She was promoted to lead investigator for the county's major crimes unit and was asked to consult on several high-profile cases across the state. But no matter where she went, the Whitmore case followed. Reporters still asked about Marjorie, about the notebook, about the smile. In a rare interview for a crime documentary, Reyes said something that struck viewers deeply. "There are murders of passion, murders of impulse. But what Marjorie did wasn't about emotion. It was about control. She killed him slowly, not with a weapon, with calculation, with access, and with silence. That's the scariest kind of killer. The one who makes you think it was your idea all along." She paused. She didn't take his life in a moment. She erased it step by step. In March of the following year, a legal clerk reviewing tax filings for the Whitmore estate discovered a hidden trust filed under an offshore entity in Belize. The beneficiary wasn't Marjorie, and it wasn't Crystal either. It was a 12-year-old boy named Julian Ward, living with his mother in Atlanta. DNA testing confirmed what some had speculated. Harold had fathered a child years earlier, possibly from a short-term relationship during his business trips. The trust contained nearly $15 million, untouched, set to release when the boy turned 18. No one had known about it, not even Harold's lawyers. But someone had made sure that the child would be taken care of, even in the event of his death. Some believed it was Harold himself, trying to quietly rewrite his legacy. Others believed it was Marjorie, her final play, securing a legacy outside the spotlight. No one could say for sure. 3 weeks after that revelation, a plain envelope appeared at the Palm Beach County Prosecutor's office. No return address, no postage mark, just a typed label that read, "To be opened only by Detective Angela Reyes." Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, bearing a short letter typed in large serif font, signed H.W. The signature was shaky, uneven, almost like it had been copied from somewhere else. The letter read, "To those I leave behind, I've made peace with the choices I've made and the price they carry. A man builds his empire only to discover the foundation was hollow. I was never meant to grow old. Let me go on my own terms. H." It was dated May 2nd, 2024, the day before Harold died. At first glance, it resembled a suicide note. But Reyes felt something off. Too neat, too clean. The language was vague, theatrical, and strangely impersonal for a farewell letter. More importantly, forensic analysis revealed only one set of prints on the paper and envelope. They belonged to Marjorie and Whitmore. Even more curious, the typeface used on the letter matched the font default of a rare, vintage German-made typewriter, one that Reyes later found in a decorative corner of Marjorie's private study during the original estate search. It had not been listed as evidence at the time, assumed to be a prop. But now, the implications were chilling. This wasn't a goodbye letter, Reyes said later. It was a narrative device, a postscript, a final nudge to frame Harold's death as something poetic. Voluntary. Investigators concluded that the letter had likely been written weeks in advance, kept hidden, and only mailed after the verdict, as a last-gasp attempt to manipulate how Harold's story would be remembered. The timing suggested someone still trying to steer the narrative, even from behind prison walls. And it worked, briefly. One local news anchor opened her next segment with a headline, "Did Harold choose death? Or was it scripted for him?" It took a full day and a public statement from the prosecutor's office to shut down the speculation. But for Reyes, the damage had been done. Marjorie's fingerprints weren't just on the murder weapon. They were on the legacy itself. She didn't just erase Harold, Reyes muttered. She tried to write his final line. And as always, Marjorie didn't respond to requests for comment. In the end, people didn't remember Harold Whitmore for his towers or his business empire, or even the way he died. They remembered him because of the woman who sat beside him for 30 years and then turned that closeness into something lethal. Because of the look in her eyes when the verdict was read. Because of the way she had planned every detail and still made it all seem like his idea. They remembered her smile. They remembered her silence. They remembered her name, Marjorie Ann Whitmore, the ghost maker. And they remembered the lesson she left behind. Sometimes the most dangerous people don't scream, don't chase, don't bleed. They wait. They watch. They whisper, just enough to make you move. And when you're gone, they leave nothing behind. Not even a trace of who you used to be.